So I have been really struggling with this comic, and the part that I'm struggling at is the thumbnail stage, and this is the part where Ingrid needs to climb up the building to save Zoe, and this is like where the final fight is going to happen. But I just cannot figure out how to properly convey that and to kind of switch over into the next scene. And this is one of the hard parts about thumbnailing, is that even if you do have the script created, you still have to create the scene, and you have to figure out the angle as well and the perspective and all that stuff from scratch, basically from a blank canvas, I should say, not from scratch because you have the script there. When you start off with a blank canvas, anything is possible, and because anything is possible, you can kind of freeze in that moment on what direction you're going to take. I think I am kind of freezing up right now. So for what I'm going to be doing tonight is I'm basically just going to be reading comics, just having fun, and hopefully that there's something in the comics that kind of catches my eye and kind of helps me figure out how to get out of this so that I can just continue to thumbnail, because I'm actually pretty close to thumbnailing the entire book. And basically what I have today, I have Dragon Ball Z by Akira Toriyama, Volume 2. Volume 1 was amazing. I am rereading this for the billionth time. I always come back to this. It's like my comfort comic. I have Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, The Shattered Grid by Kyle Higgins. This is a really, really cool version of the Power Rangers if this is something you're interested in. And then also I have Headlopper by Andrew MacLean, a really fun fantasy book. I'm just going to be reading those today. So I'm finally finished with reading these books. I'll be honest with you, I did not get anything from them. I had a good time reading them. It was really fun. I liked them a lot, but it did not really help me because I have nothing. I think this is one of the realities of being an artist or a comic book artist, is that some nights, some days, you just can't get out of that little rut that you're in. I know that everything's going to be perfectly fine. I'll probably figure something out soon, but tonight is not one of them. That's a lesson for you guys. Sometimes you'll hit a wall, but you got to learn how to keep going, and I'll probably figure something out tomorrow. Alright, so it's kind of been a while since I last recorded, but another update that I did was that I finally figured out how to do that sequence, the one that I was struggling with at the beginning of the video. So as I was reading those comics, specifically with the Dragon Ball Z manga, there was a panel in there that was showing Goku hop up like a rock formation, and I was like, oh man, I could probably use something like this to kind of indicate that Ingrid is now moving up the building and will transition into the next scene with Zoe and our villain. And that's what I did. Basically, I kind of made it work that way. So I don't know if that's the perfect solution to that problem, but I'm just gonna keep going now because now I'm completely out of that rut. So even if sometimes it doesn't feel like you're not getting anything, sometimes it'll come to you later on. And I was able to get some stuff done. So now that I've gotten to thumbnail a little bit more, I wanted to take a break from that and start inking. And I thought that it would start kind of pick up where I last left off in the comic. In this clip that you're seeing right now, I'm doing the inking for this one big panel of where Ingrid gets thrown into the ground. And it's this really cool scene of all the aliens kind of scattering around, all the chaos. You see Ingrid's arm sticking out and all these cool lines and all this stuff that I drew. But yeah, it's probably one of my favorite panels to draw. I wanted to get to like the main part of this video, and the reason why you clicked on this video is why you should make a comic. And I'm specifically talking to all the artists out there who are drawing and doing illustrations or whatever, doing one-off illustrations. I really do think that if you have the ability or the desire to draw, I think it's a really cool idea to consider making a comic. And I'm not talking about something super big, like something like this thick. That's not what I'm asking you to do. Just make a short story, however short you want it to be, using sequential art. And you can do that with 4 panels and you can do that with 1,000 panels. But the reasons why I feel like making a comic is good for all artists is because number one, it's going to really stretch your abilities. Because as artists, if you're just like the regular person, we get comfortable in the poses that we draw. So for example, for my art, if you look at my Instagram, a lot of the poses of my characters, they're fairly the same. The 3/4 view, standing up straight, you know, all that stuff. There might be a little hint of variety here and there, but generally it's kind of the same. But when you're making a comic, when you are creating a story that requires your characters to be moving in space and walking around and fighting, you'll be forced out of your comfort zone. And while your art may suffer because of that, it makes you better because of the experience that you're building. You know, whenever my comic does come out, my figures are not really going to look that great, especially when it comes to like the big fight scenes and whatever. They're not as dynamic as most professionals because I just don't have the experience. But since I'm forced to start the experience here at this moment, I'm one step ahead to making an even better looking comic in the future. The second reason I think that making a comic is really good for artists is because it's relatively low budget. And I put low budget in quotation marks because we can get into specifics of like using an iPad to make comics, which is like $1,000, but you can create a comic with just a pencil and paper. And some people even make comics from sticky notes. So it is as cheap as you really want it to be. So there's nothing really that like, you don't have to spend your money on large tech if you don't want to. It can always fit your budget. And even comic artists, professional comic artists that work in the industry today, some of them still work with pen and paper. Now, of course, there's Photoshop involved. They do scan it and Photoshop is involved, but to actually draw it, to start the actual comic, they're not dealing with super technical things or expensive things. They're dealing with pencil and paper. So you don't have to have a super expensive tablet. You can just create your comic with just the regular tools. When it comes to low budget as well, you're not really paying for artists. You're not paying for writers. You're not paying for voice actors or camera equipment or visual effects. This is something that you can draw on your own. And yes, your skill level in drawing, that determines whether or not that stuff is possible, but still it's more expensive to pay for all of those things. The third reason why I think all artists should make a comic is because everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has gone through things. Everybody has had experiences. Maybe you took a really cool vacation this summer. Some of you are dealing with some traumatic things. Some of you have some exciting things happening and you want to show the world. And I think that creating stories that show your experience is a really good thing for people. If you share like a happy experience or a fun experience, it can help heal someone who's not positive in that moment. There's something positive when it comes to sharing negative experiences because sometimes people don't want to feel alone. A lot of people are struggling negatively in some aspect and they feel like they're just by themselves and nobody understands. So your negative experience can really help them feel like, hey, this author, this artist is also struggling with the same thing. This is done by Deb Lee. This is called In Limbo. And this comic is basically a memoir of her childhood and growing up as a teenager. But it's just sharing her experiences as a teenager and especially the rough relationship that she has with her mother. All that to say is that maybe some of you out there struggle with or have a weird relationship with your parents. And this book is something that can help you feel like you're not alone. And I think that's a great reason to make a comic. And when I say to share your experiences, it doesn't have to be in the real world. You can tell the story of that fun vacation using animal characters or fantasy characters. Some of you that are struggling in negative experiences or positive experiences, you can share that with sci-fi characters. So you don't have to stick yourself physically into a comic book. You can put these experiences on made up characters in whatever way you like. Speaking of experiences, don't wait for somebody to tell you that it's okay to publish your story. I went to college with a lot of other kids that had their own fun story or cool story, and they wanted to get hired by Disney or Nickelodeon or, you know, one of these big animation studios, and that was their way in, and they wanted to get hired by these studios so that they can finally pitch their story and their story would get greenlit and then their story would become an animated series. I don't know if you guys can see the problem with that is that you're relying on somebody else to tell you that it's okay for other people to see your story when you should be the one that decides whether or not your story should be seen. Because these people that work in these studios, studios, these gatekeepers, they're only going to say okay with what they think the market desires. So they're not even thinking about, you know, would this be good for people watching right now? Is this what's popular? Is this what is going to make money? For example, like when Harry Potter was big and all that fantasy and magic stuff was super popular, a lot of studios wanted to piggyback off of that popularity. So they wanted fantasy elements, they wanted magic or something like magic. They weren't interested in sci-fi stuff. So during that time, there could have been really cool sci-fi stories coming through the studios, but they just weren't getting approved because that's not what the market desires. Harry Potter is the super popular thing, so we should be piggybacking off of that. And that's not something that I think people should rely on. So if you have your story, if you have an experience you want to tell, don't rely on anybody else except you. Create that story.